joining us this evening for Lifetime's adoption webinar for adoptive parents. We have so much information to share with you, and we just want to cover a couple basics. You can visit us online at lifetimeadoption.com. You can call in to personally discuss your questions and concerns, 530-432-7373. And my name is Kim King, and we have Libby Murray here as well. Libby, any tips for us tonight?
No, I do want to just encourage all of you to engage in this conversation that we're having, because I do think that a lot of the things we're discussing may strike a nerve, whether or not you're already part of Lifetime's program, even if you're just at the very beginning stages of thinking about adopting a child. Tonight's topics, I think, are, they hit a nerve. They hit where maybe you didn't even realize that you had these thoughts, but maybe you've had thoughts circling around them, and we just want to encourage you to get the most out of tonight's call, and that if you have any questions during the call or after, that Kim, you and I were talking earlier that one of the great things about Lifetime's program is that in all stages of a family's journey through adoption, we are happy to supply answers and availability. So please reach out. Now, Kim, if they had a question and they wanted to email you, should they email you directly, or what's the best way to contact us online?
Please feel free to email Kim at lifetimeadoption.com with any questions you have. Now, if you're already with Lifetime and have a coordinator that you know you're assigned to work with and she's been assigned to work with you, then obviously that's the best place to go with your questions and updates. But if you're very new to us and you don't have someone like that yet, I'm happy to help you out until we can get you an assigned coordinator, whether you're going to be in the exploration or whether you're becoming a Lifetime family within our program. So tonight we wanted to discuss some things that are very often misunderstood that surround adoption, especially open adoption. And so we're calling tonight Busted, Common Myths and Fears that adopting parents have about open adoption. And we're hoping that these will be, that the information will be very reassuring to you, because I think that a lot of the myths surrounding open adoption, well, obviously they're myths. They're not true. They can be really scary, and you've got to replace that fear with fact, so now you can make an informed decision instead of running like your hair is on fire in the other direction from something that you don't even know whether or not it's true.
And that's really what I see, Kim. I see so many people, even people who aren't directly thinking about adopting a child, have a lot of misunderstandings about what open adoption really means and the opportunities available with that. And I know that that can create a guard sometimes to even having a friend go through open adoption. And certainly it could impact even how you look at birth mothers when you are believing the myths or the fears that adoptive parents often have that, really education is key. And that's a big part of Lifetime's role in the adoption community, is just that we want to make sure people are all on the same page, because we all, just depending on how you define a generation these days, probably most of us at least know cousins or maybe siblings or friends who might have grown up through adoption in the older days of adoption. But it's amazing how long open adoption has actually been becoming more common, but people still don't completely understand it. And so we're hoping tonight to just tap in on the things that we hear from adoptive families in all different phases. And sometimes we even hear these from families after they adopt. And that just brings to our heart the fact that more clarity is needed to encourage you to see the truth about open adoption before you decide if it's for you. And I say that, Kim, and it's really almost the same speech that I give to women who are thinking about adoption as birth parents, because the truth is that I get a lot of calls, say, from pregnant women or struggling mothers, and they don't usually know what open adoption means either. And sometimes they've heard negative things about it, or they may even have their own fears based on stereotypes or things that they might have even heard adoptive parents say before, all circling around misinformation, misunderstanding, and that when I actually explain to her what open adoption is, then she starts to think, well, would that be right for me or not? And that's really what it gets down to, is becoming educated and then deciding if that's the right path for your family.
Right. And I think because of the internet and opportunities like this, these webinars we host, so many more people do have that opportunity to learn and make an informed decision. And usually once people know all the facts with open adoption, they find that that's something they want. I mean, when they've actually given it a chance and have the time to sit down and read about it and talk about it and really digest that information and envision what that life would be like through open adoption. In fact, a couple years ago, I saw a statistic from one of the the places that do studies and read all the reports from tax returns and everything like that with the tax credit and all. They said over 90% of the adoptions in the U.S., domestic adoption, are considered open adoptions. And we're going to define that for you too. You know, we're going to explain what open adoption, what it means in essence, like the nutshell version too, just to start off with, so we're all on the same page.
So Kim, I want to bring up on the screen the top 3 myths that we hear from hopeful adoptive parents about open adoption. I'm trying to bring this up here. Good, that popped up. And these are things we actually hear. So I hope that maybe at least 2 of you on the call resonate and think, oh, I might have even heard that in my own head before, or maybe, yeah, I heard my neighbor say that, or whatever it is, that we're not saying these to attack you, that we're saying these to call them out and shed light on them, because, you know, every fear, every myth usually starts with some basis of a truth they might have heard one time, but it doesn't apply to everyone. And so then it turns into this perpetuated negativity that can really turn adoptive parents away from the child that they may actually be called to adopt. So that first one being, well, open adoption really only benefits the child's birth mother. We'll discuss that, and we'll talk about the benefits of open adoption to you as well as your child and to a birth mother. The other one that we hear, Kim, is, well, open adoption is confusing for a child. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about tips for sharing adoption with your child and not having fear around your child's adoption story, but to become open and communicating that throughout your child's life. Absolutely, absolutely.
Confidence.
We're also familiar with this next quote, which I know is a big concern for many hopeful parents, especially when maybe they haven't raised a child at all yet, or maybe all they have had is a biological child, and maybe they don't even know other children who were adopted into a family. And sometimes we hear from adoptive parents, you know, open adoption would mean I'm not completely my child's mom or dad. So we're going to talk about that and give you some reassurance so that you can sort of wipe that off your mind and just focus on what are the steps that are going to get me to the family I've been praying for. And Kim, I wanted to point out too that on these slides, I tried to pull very recent photos, and some of you may have seen these throughout our various websites or social media if you've been on Facebook at all, that these are actual children or families or birth mothers touched by lifetime adoption. We have served these people and these stories. And so as you're looking and you see the pictures of these babies and the quotes or the testimonies that happen in these images that support our slides tonight, just know those are real stories. And Kim, one of the things too, I know that I see a lot of people here that join us for many of our webinars, that you can go to adoptionteleconference.com and look back on some of our recent webinars, and you may even hear the stories behind some of these babies. So again, I just wanted to point that out because I don't want anyone to think that these are just stock images. These are actual lifetime adoptions. So let's go here. Kim, you said we were going to define open adoption. I think that's a really good place to start. So real quick here, and I want to share, Kim, from my experience that I remember I had worked here a couple years, and I remember speaking with an adoption attorney who's actually one of the references. We have one of the resources we have for families who are in the research phase too. So I remember talking with him, and he said, well, essentially what open adoption means is a birth mother knows where her child goes, and you know where her child starts. So all of the other stuff kind of falls into a gray area that is customized and unique for every single person. And so going back to, and I think we've talked about this before, but I had this conversation actually a couple nights ago over the weekend with a prospective birth mom who didn't really understand what open adoption meant, and she had called some other adoption agencies, and it had been defined to her as if she needed to choose now whether it would be closed, semi-open, or open. And I explained to her, you know, there's really not one box to put an open adoption in, because even if you don't want to have contact after an adoption, but you want to choose your baby's parents, that makes it an open adoption. So all of the other details that come together, I think sometimes we could make this into a 3-hour, you know, the top 20 myths about open adoption. You know, things like open adoption means you have to have contact after an adoption. Well, no, contact after an adoption is just one of the options. It's one of those gray areas that's different adoption to adoption. And so essentially here we have, you know, your adoption records remain open as compared to the old days with closed adoptions, or with many international adoptions, you don't have a lot of openness or open records. Sometimes you don't even know how that child ended up in the placement. The other side of this too is that you know where your child begins. You know that birth history, and your child's birth mother knows who adopts her child and what, you know, essentially where her child goes. Now, Kim, do you have any relatives that may have been raised through closed adoption in the old days?
You know, my mom might have been adopted from Korea. I'm just joking. Actually, she was. I know that for a fact. But that's pretty much the only thing I know for a fact. Because as most people know, especially decades ago, I mean, international adoption is evolving. But the typical thing is that you really don't know the history. You really may not even know when your child first appeared. Like my mom doesn't have a specific date that she first appeared at the orphanage in Korea. Now, thank God that ministry was there, and they were actively reaching out to American families to provide homes for these children, and that my mom was flown over here and given the parents and siblings that are my family, the only family I know, other than, of course, the rest of my family, my dad's side. But we don't have medical history. We don't have a real name, a real birth date. We don't have any of that fact in our history. It's just an unknown. And to be honest, it's really just not something that's probably ever going to be filled in with information. I mean, we all would like it. We all want to know. My sisters and I and my mom, we want to know. We're hungry for that information, but we know that it's just not possible. So that's how I've been touched by closed adoption. It is such a blessing that my mom was adopted. And when you hear my grandma talk about, we call her Nana, she talks about the day she got my mom into her arms for the very first time. And she says how that was the happiest day of her life. And she's 90. That's pretty, you know, that's a blessing, a miracle, you know. And so we're grateful, thankful. We always talk about, well, when it comes up, we talk about what it would have been if adoption hadn't happened for my mom. Well, I would have just been another egg, to tell you the truth, so I wouldn't even be here. So adoption definitely has touched my life, but I definitely value, I definitely value the fact that we can create awareness with open adoption, so that another child doesn't have to grow up and tell her children, sorry, I don't have a medical history. You got to watch me know. You got to watch me, and I will tell you what I go through. But especially at my mom's age now, it's becoming more and more important to her. I'd say within the last 10 years, it's been more on her mind that she doesn't really have a medical history. So.
Interesting. So, and there are people who are even, under 18 years old that are living with closed adoptions, and those, I don't want to talk about open adoption tonight and make people feel like, well, gosh, I should feel guilty about adopting a child internationally or through foster care where I have none of that history. No. We're not trying to point out that open adoption is the best. We're just addressing one type of adoption that a lot of people say no to out of fears or misunderstandings. And so we want to call out what it really is, again, so that you can decide, is this what we're being called to? And that certainly, as you've heard from Kim's story, that you can have a happy, healthy family life growing up without that information, but that there are benefits to open adoption, and they're not, they're not just about peace of mind.
And, Libby, they can go and listen to Tanya's interview. Tanya, one of our coordinators here at Lifetime, she was adopted domestically, and she shares about it too. So on adoptionteleconference.com is where you can hear the recording.
That's great. So then, like I was saying, those gray areas with open adoption are what I more refer to as the options with open adoption. So let's see here. This little cutie pie on here. Okay. Whoops.
Well, at first I thought that was a flower, but it's a pacifier.
Oh.
I just realized that after staring at that photo for so long. That's not a flower.
I'm trying to get this little black bubble to get off of the graphic here, so hopefully that'll go away.
I don't see it on my end, so.
Good. Now, briefly, and Kim, I want you to talk about the choices an adoptive family has with open adoption, but because I do work so often with the birth moms, I wanted to just review briefly the choices, the options that a birth mother has with open adoption, which, if you read these well, they tie into the options that you get and ultimately all work together for the benefits towards you as well as her. So briefly to review, when a birth mother is considering open adoption, she can choose her child's adoptive parent or parents. She can get to know the adoptive parents before the adoption takes place. She can decide how things go when she gives birth at the hospital, or if her baby's already born, she can decide how things will go, for that transition from her to the adoptive family she chooses for her child. And then certainly the other option with open adoption is if she wants to know what happens with her child after the adoption, she can create an ongoing relationship with the adoptive family or choose to receive updates through a third party, whatever she's comfortable with or whatever she works out with the adoptive family. And so, Kim, let's review the things that an adoptive parent has the options with in open adoption.
Right. I mean, as Libby's known to say, you move at your own pace, you decide what's right for you. And here at Lifetime in our program, what we do is let you know whether or not we can be successful within what you know you're comfortable with. And then once you're with us in the program, we pursue matches with birth moms that are within what you've said you're okay with. So like Libby was saying, just because it's an option doesn't mean it fits everyone, and doesn't mean that every aspect of open adoption is perfect for you. You can customize it. So basically you can indicate your preferences and set up your criteria before birth moms even know about you. So that's all starting out before you know her. So it's more of an intellectually based decision because I really think it's in everyone's best interest to make decisions before they become emotional decisions. I mean, if you think about the decisions you've made based purely on emotions, and emotions can run high when you're adopting, especially when you already know you're one phone call away from having basically the plan for your baby to be in your arms. Emotions can run high, and we need to have coached you and worked with you ahead of time to know that this intellectually fits. You've had a chance to make the parenting decisions ahead of time, come up with the plan and do the research, and you know what works for you, and then we honor that plan by presenting you to birth moms that are within what you know you're comfortable with and that you also meet what she's comfortable with. Also with open adoption, something that's great about it is that you may have the option of being a part of the hospital experience, whether that's you get there as soon as you can and you get to actually be there for the first moments of your child's life, and the birth mom wants you to maybe be the first people to hold your baby, or maybe you get to spend some time as she's recovering. You get to sit and spend that time visiting and maybe take some pictures together because you all know each other.
Well, and kind of as like a precursor even to that, with open adoption, you may even be involved during her pregnancy. And I've known a lot of adoptive parents where the birth mom has said, I really want for you to come to my ultrasound appointment. And then you get an even better, chance to bond with her and have this story even deeper as far as your child's history is concerned.
Right. You have a history with that birth mom that dates back to before the birth, which is a great opportunity to have that and be able to share about that with your child in later years, age appropriately, of course. But, that visit before the adoption takes place, it's really up to you and birth mom whether or not it's doable for you as a parent, when you know you're going to be traveling to pick up your baby at the birth. It may or may not be doable, and then whether or not she's even open to that ahead of time, we'll coach you through that and come up with something that works with, for both of you and that's doable for you. And then also I think something that's really key is that with open adoption, you get to know everything that we know about a birth mom. So, and you get to actually learn about the birth mom from the coordinator who's been working with her all along and knows her best of anyone here at Lifetime. So that's the person, that first-hand person is going to be the one who calls you and shares, that this birth mom has viewed your profile and, she wants to set up that next step. She wants to have that phone call with you. So she's going to share everything we've learned, her background, what's going on in her life right now, what her goals are for the future, the medical information, everything we have. Like we used to always say in the military, maximum disclosure, minimum delay. Everything we gather is for you so you can make that informed decision. And you get, once you confirm that match with her too, you get printed copies of whatever we have. So you'll get a copy of the paperwork she completes for Lifetime. And as we pull prenatal records during her pregnancy, we'll give those to you too. And sometimes, let me just share with you right now, a lot of birth moms love knowing that. You might think, and I've heard some people think, well, gosh, wouldn't she feel like that was an invasion of her privacy, all that information being handed over? But how she sees it is that she's laying out this history for her child. She's giving you essentially a file on her baby through this prenatal history and these medical records and this paperwork she's completing for us that. And we discussed this on another webinar before, but if you want to go on lifetimeadoption.com, you can fish around like you were a birth mother and look for the paperwork that she does have to complete, and you can see that it's about as thorough as the application we require from adoptive families, because we want to know, just like we want to know with you, we want to know with her, what are your adoption hopes and needs? What do you want the adoptive family to know about you? What do you want your child to know about you? And not all things are logistics and check boxes. Sometimes it's a sentiment or a favorite color or a favorite hobby or just something you want to pass down to your child so that as the adoptive parents that you choose for your baby, you're handing this over because this child may have questions later, and that it's kind of special. I've met a lot of adoptive families who
they enjoyed that opportunity to meet their child's birth mom, even if it was just by phone until the birth. But they've had this opportunity to get to know each other, and then as that child grows up, they might notice things like, "Wow, you giggle like the few times that we actually had lunch with your birth mom, and she has the same laugh," and that it becomes a sweet thing, not so much of a we don't know anything or we don't want to know anything. It becomes something you look at your child and you remember her fondly in those moments when you got to know each other before this child came into your life.
Well, Libby, there was a comment that came in that says that, my husband's so afraid that some medical history will be hidden, but it doesn't sound like that could even be a hidden. And here's the thing, we're birth moms, as Libby kind of mentioned, she wants us to have this information, and it's so important to her that you guys know as much as, we can speak in generalities here, which is the only way we can have a conversation like this. This doesn't go 100% for every single birth mom who ever came to Lifetime or any other organization, but in general, it's pretty important. It's valuable to her that we're able to share this with you, because that also prevents the family she gets to know and invest in emotionally and envisions being the parents of her child, that prevents it from falling apart if they learn something later.
And I'll tell you too, this is how I talk when I'm talking with a birth mom for the first time, and I'm going through, I have an intake in front of me right here, so I'm asking her not only how can I reach you again, how can I send you information, but I'm asking her, how's your pregnancy been so far? Have you had prenatal care? Are there any health concerns your doctor has, or are there any health concerns from a prior pregnancy that might mean complications for this pregnancy? How about you personally? Do you have any health concerns, any medical history, mental or physical, that could affect this baby? Any substance use during your pregnancy, even if it was just a glass of wine before you found out, And let me tell you right now, it is rare that we are surprised by a birth mother. Usually, like Kim said, they want to be honest because they're taking this seriously, and they want you to be prepared to say yes or no. They don't want to hide things and risk you changing your mind and adopting this baby at the last minute, because and that might surprise some of you to hear, because that might be your concern. But birth moms also have the fear that you're going to change your mind about adopting her child. So she's going to be forthcoming. And that when we find out there are things, like maybe an extreme case where there was alcohol use, or maybe there are special needs within her own personal medical history that might mean that this child has that risk too. We're going to look for families, like Kim described earlier with the options. You get to tell us what you're comfortable saying yes to, so that we're not going to call you and try and talk you into something that you already told us you're not comfortable saying yes to.
Right. We don't want to put you in that position, because that is kind of an unneeded emotional roller coaster for you as parents in our program. We don't want that for you. And we also don't want to put a birth mom in the position to be rejected once she's already read your profile and everything. So it's really important to us that we do understand your criteria. And from the very beginning, that's something we need to know about before we even offer an opening in our program, because you need to have confidence that you'll be successful in our program too, that we understand what you're looking for, and that, yes, we can meet that expectation.
So let's see here, Kim. I want to make sure
I saw a couple comments come in, Libby, that are going to come into play with some other slideshows, so we are definitely going to bring those into the conversation.
And I love seeing these comments come through, because to me it's, again, the reason we put this together tonight was because we hear these from families 5 years ago and today, and yesterday and everywhere in between. So we know that this topic of open adoption and what is this all about, and are these things legitimate worries or concerns, that's on your brain, whether you've decided to pursue it or not. We want to, again, shed some light on this so that you can decide, yes, I'm ready for that, or no, maybe there's another option, or maybe I have more research to do first.
Yeah.
So I really
And here's the
appreciate all of
thing.
these comments.
Totally. And here's the thing. I'm glad people feel confident and, well, comfortable sharing these comments and questions with us because that's what this is for. I mean, if everyone was comfortable with open adoption, we wouldn't need to have this webinar. You know?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's because these are natural fears and concerns and questions, and that these myths are running rampant, that we have a need to have this webinar. And, you know, the fact that you're even listening means that your heart is open, which is a big indicator for success, because you're coming with an open heart and mind to receive the information, digest it, and then make your decision.
So let's talk about that first myth. Open adoption, this is a myth. Open adoption only benefits the birth mother. That is false. And, you know, some birth moms may even feel the opposite, that open adoption only benefits adoptive family, you know, that she often worries that you're going to back out of any relationship agreement that you may have created before the adoption. And so she sometimes has the same worry, only opposite of you. But let's talk about the benefits for adoptive parents through open adoption. Because we already reviewed the choices that a birth mother gets when she's deciding to choose adoption for her child. And obviously those point out some obvious benefits to her. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about you as the adoptive parents and what this could look like for you. So Kim, number one thing, and I put it here, number one, a birth mother is less likely to change her mind if you have an open adoption with her.
Absolutely.
When she can choose you, and not feel like you were somebody she settled on because you were the only one, or because that was what was told to her would happen, she's less likely to feel forced into this adoption. It's more likely to be a willful, intentional decision for her child's future. And part of how she's going to choose you is she's going to learn about you through, you know, profiles like you may have seen online, or she'll get a printed version, and it'll walk through just kind of a nutshell of what your life is like and what your life would look like for her child, and that she's going to choose that based on you sharing the truth about yourselves, and not on this mystery of, well, I heard they live in the Southwest, but I don't even know their names, and there's just all this mystery, this
what they
unknown.
look like, what
Right.
their values are, what are the values they'll instill in my child. You know, there can be a lot of uncertainty there when your imagination has the opportunity to run wild. But when the birth mom has that opportunity for someone to paint her a picture of what, here, if you choose us as parents, this is the picture of what your life will be, what your child's life will be like.
And this might, I was thinking this might surprise people, Kim, because I think that another myth that we hear, and we didn't put it in tonight because it kind of falls under a lot of these three, is one of the fears of open adoption is that a birth mom could come back and change her mind, right?
Yeah, that's a myth.
That's a myth. And can you talk a little bit about why that is a just bold-faced lie?
Well, with adoption, especially within our program where you're actually in a program, birth mom is reaching out to purposefully and willfully make this adoption plan of her own accord. She's reaching out. She's exploring and learning what adoption really means. And then she has the opportunity to speak with an adoption attorney to learn the legalities that surround adoption. And when we counsel her too, and provide the information of what adoption really is, we share that it's permanent. You're going to have a certain amount of time to think about this, and once it's permanent and you can't change it. So this is a long-term, lifelong commitment that you're making here. So we want you to be sure this is really what you want. And so once the paperwork is complete, and every state is different. I would say the longest one I've seen is like 30 days, but most are less than 10 days. Some are 48 hours. Some are instantly upon signing that she can no longer change her mind. That's it. So having an open adoption, letting her get to know you knowing why she chose adoption and all the particulars of her background, as well as maybe sending letters and photos, doesn't change an ounce the legality that now the law sees this as your child, you know, just as any biological child.
And I'll share too, this doesn't happen very often, but very recently, this is why it's on my heart. You know, it's occasionally that we hear from a birth mother after months or years where she might say, I wish I hadn't have done adoption. But I'll tell you right now, there's usually more to the story than that. And sometimes they share it, and sometimes they don't. But my response to her is always, you know, you made your decision. Your child is in a loving, stable, wonderful home. They love him or her, you know, and I encourage her then to take advantage of our counseling options or our peer support, and to maintain her connection through open adoption, because sometimes that response comes out of maybe a grieving, which is going to be, it's going to be a normal phase. She's going to go through a phase of grieving this adoption, grieving this child, and wondering, did I make the right decision? But I'll tell you right now, the families who have and maintain their promise for open adoption, I see less times where that child's birth mom is calling me up, crying, and regretting her decision, because she knows that they didn't just take the baby and run, that she chose them and she got to know them, and so that also developed a trust between you. So you're trusting her to go through with the adoption and to trust you after the adoption. You know, it's just like any relationship where you have to start out slow and build this trust level so that later, when you're not in front of each other, you're not having all of these second-guessing thoughts going through your head of, what are they thinking? What are they doing? Are they really going to follow through? You know, you probably will have already kind of worked through a lot of those fears. And I'll tell you right now, too, the most common thing I hear is families that are just surprised at how easily they gelled with their child's birth mom. That it wasn't this big shock of, we've never met a woman like her, you know, her life is so surprising. It's more like, oh, she could easily be my niece or my sister's friend, and you know, we just came together this way. So so just try and roll with that. Now let's move on to the next one, which is you know, another benefit of open adoption to you, as we already shared through Kim's story, is medical history and prenatal records for your child.
Well, and it goes beyond that. The medical link is so important. Do you remember, Libby, we had that family that called because they needed to reach the birth family because their child needed a bone marrow donor. And it was really vital that they reach her, and somehow they had lost that connection. And they needed that. So, you know, you want to maintain that link. That I think it's important to both sides. Usually once you've gotten that baby in your arms, from there, when you go through all the natural worries of parenting, it's nice to know you can email that birth mom and say, hey, I was wondering about this medical thing. Is this something you've seen in your family with other babies?
And it works the opposite way, too. You just reminded me, Kim, because we've had birth mothers. Actually, this happened a couple months ago. Woman called us. Immediately, we remembered working with her because it had only been, I think, a year, maybe a year and a half, since the adoption had happened. She found out that her mother was going through breast cancer, and she wanted to update the adoptive parents so that that was part of the child's biological medical history. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean the child's going to, you know, get breast cancer, as we all know. But she was diligent and thoughtful in the fact of, I have this child out there that I chose adoption for, and I did not have this information when that child was born, and I want to make sure I pass it on. So it may not have caused an imminent need, but she cared. She cared about, you know, how can I help my child as best as possible. So she passed it on through us. And if you have a personal connection with her, she may just pass it right on directly to you. Now, Kim, we had a good question come up about, you know, addressing that first topic of open adoption actually reduces the chances that she'll change her mind about adoption. And this actually talked about the birth father. What if he comes into the picture and tries to revoke the adoption? You know, every adoption is different. I will say, if there's ever a risk, you know, if the attorney sees a risk of the father coming in after a birth mother has signed her rights and interrupting that adoption plan, we usually know before the adoption even begins. And these are part of the questions that we're asking a birth mother too, is not only about her own situation, but what's the situation with this baby's biological father, and and where's he stand on adoption. And so I don't want to get into it because every state is so different, especially with respect to birth father rights. But if your adoption is handled by qualified adoption attorneys, and you know, you take that time to work with a professional who asks the right questions, you're not going to face this risk. And there's so many different ways to answer that, so I hate being vague, but it's just that it's not as common. It's more common that I see. Here's a rule of thumb. Right.
Here's a rule of thumb, is that in every state there's an avenue for the attorney to pursue to resolve the birth father issue. If he wants to parent, he is the biological parent of that child, and if the adoption hasn't been complete and the avenue hasn't, you know, the process hasn't been completed, that's his right. And here at Lifetime, we will pursue a different match for you and continue to be committed to your successful adoption.
Absolutely.
And also, I don't think anyone wants to, if he is showing that he is able and willing and desiring to parent, I don't think anyone wants to really interrupt that, you know, because especially when you know that there is another match out there for you. This isn't the end of the road for you. It's not like that's the only option you have, is that one baby in particular. You know,
well,
so,
and I think
what for him, that's it. You know, that's
exactly. Child, and what stands out to me is that, like I often hear that question actually from birth mothers, that they have a concern. Well, what if, is it possible for him to come in and interrupt this plan? And so we will get her legal advice before she is even talking with adoptive parents that she's interested in. And usually we already know if there are any loopholes, we try and get those answered before you become involved in the situation. So again, every situation is a little different, but you'll have all that information before you accept the match. Let's see here. So another benefit is, you know, the opportunity, like we've been talking about, getting to know her. You have the opportunity to learn answers to questions that your child may ask later. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, on that one as we discuss the myth number 3. But let's see here. You know, Kim, we were talking earlier about open adoption allows you to create a connection that is right for all involved. So it's not just that the birth mom dictates how the adoption will go. Now, one of the reasons she's less likely to change her mind is because she gets a say in every step of the process. But you do too, which leads us to our next one, which is you can design a plan for future contact. And that looks different for every family. And Kim, I know through your phase of supporting adoptive parents that you're often talking about, well, what are you comfortable with at this point? And I'll share with you my perspective, which is usually once parents kind of move through those first few months of beginning an adoption plan, and they start hearing more people talk about their personal stories, and they start just maybe even praying on it, or just relaxing and sort of settling in, we're going to adopt, yeah, like I'm gonna adopt a child. I see people start to relax a little bit more about this future contact concept. And just like I tell birth moms, I will tell all of you on the call tonight, it's pretty impossible to imagine a relationship with someone you don't know yet. But when you finally get to know her, then it turns into a conversation and not so much something that's black or white, yes or no, I do accept or I won't accept. Then it turns into, oh, well, I'm on Facebook. Well, I am too. Well, how about we share photos there? Or maybe if you're not comfortable with that, you say, well, here's a special email account I set up just for you.
Yeah.
All kinds of possibilities for an ongoing contact relationship. And that's why we say you get to design a plan for future contact, which also leads back to what we talked about earlier, which is you're laying this out before you even know your child's birth mom. You're telling us what you're comfortable with, so that, some people are comfortable with, a more casual open adoption. Others want things a little bit more, specific. And so you're going to share that and be presented only to opportunities that fit in those criteria. And then I think if this hasn't been hammered home already, that, another benefit of open adoption for all of you adoptive parents is that you really will come to care about what happens to your child's birth mother after the adoption, and you'll want to know how she's doing. And I actually got 2 emails from 2 different families this week who were actually kind of brokenhearted that their child's birth mother hasn't been in touch for some time. And one of them even told the adopted mother, I don't want to stay in touch right now. And the adopted mom really liked her, and she felt like they had a friendship. And so now the adopted mom shared, I feel like I lost a friend. So she really cares about what she's going through, and she wants to respect the birth mother's comfort level with this contact and the relationship, but she misses her. So you'll probably be surprised, because the truth is, and I put this up here, it is more often that we hear from adoptive parents who wish that they could be more in touch with their child's birth mother after the adoption.
Yeah, I think so, because you're with the child. You're seeing the wonderful things that child is doing every day, the new things that they're learning, picking up something for the first time, playing with a toy, discovering their feet. And I think for most adoptive parents, they can't help but want to share that with the birth mom at that point, because now they have that confidence. This is their baby. Their baby's not going anywhere. They're a mom now. They're a dad now. And, they know who she is, and they want her to know everything's okay and what that child is doing. And I think that sometimes, it leans more in their favor that they want that more than the birth mom is wondering, maybe. So.
Right. We had some feedback here. I think Kim must be an adoptive parent already. She said, hang in there. The birth mother is grieving. She will come back around, which is true. And that is sort of a piggyback link or a myth here. Is that some people do feel like, well, if she's not responding, then I don't have to keep the open adoption contact going. And that is false. I mean, I see people doing it, but I always encourage families, keep up your end, because you never want her to have any reason to believe that you were the one that stopped contact. You want to show her that you promised to keep in touch in this way, and until you get direction to stop that from her, just keep doing it, because you don't know how it's hitting her on the other side. She might be reading your email or looking at a photo and going through that grieving process and just so grateful that you send it, but she doesn't have the words right now to write back to you and say thank you or let you know what's going on in her life. So don't take it personally if she's not reciprocating. Just keep up your end.
Yeah.
So should we move on to the next myth here, Kim?
Yeah.
Okay. So myth number 2, open adoption will confuse my child. And if you have the privilege of joining us online tonight, I want to point out that the photo here is actually a birth mother who shared her story. You can find Rebecca's story. Actually, I think you would have to email us personally. So if you want a link to Rebecca's story, send an email to Kim, and we will get that to you. And her email is kim@lifetimeadoption.com. But Rebecca is a birth mother who chose adoption just a little over a year ago. And here she is with the adoptive mother of the adoptive couple she chose for her baby girl. And they recently had a visit. just after little Lauren here turned 1, and this was a picture from their visit. So this is a very recent photo. I just wanted to point that out here. Now, Kim, today I just wanted to point back also to our Facebook page, and that we had a really interesting testimony posted on one of our posts from this morning about a common question about open adoption that Marty answered on our blog this week. But this woman, she was raised through closed adoption, and she was generous enough to share her own personal testimony. So I'm going to read this quote in case those of you, on the phone are wondering what we're talking about here. But also you can go to facebook.com/open.adoption and look for a post earlier this morning, and you'll find Allison's response and her story as a child raised through closed adoption. She's an adult now. But she told us today, "I always knew I was adopted. I was proud to be chosen. I had 2 loving parents, a happy childhood, and many opportunities that I would never have had if I was not adopted. But here's the problem with closed adoption. If I had just known her from the beginning, the great mystery of who is my birth mother would never have been such a great mystery. I would have known through her communication over the years that she loved me and did what was best for me." And little backstory, just to summarize here, is because it wouldn't fit into the slide, that she actually, as an adult, and she is a mother herself now, she reunited with her birth mother, but both of them had sort of this fantasy that maybe they'd meet and have this instant connection because they had biological bonds, but they met, and they actually found that it was a kind of a frustrating, difficult relationship because they had these expectations that were a little unreasonable, because essentially they were strangers, and then there were hurt feelings because of this confusion, and they really didn't know, how do we move past this? And then the woman who shared her story today, as the child in this story, she was sharing how she really kind of had to back off because her birth mother wasn't completely understanding that she needed to go a little slower in the relationship and build this trust, just like you do in any friendship. And so for her, she looks back and she shared these quotes with us that if she had had an open adoption, there would have been this gradual relationship. There wouldn't have been this fantasy about, who's this woman out there, and am I gonna just like her and love her upon meeting her because I was born of her? Well, no. And I can tell you right now, I mean, I have relatives. My grandma always said, this might make some of you laugh, my grandma always said, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives. And it's true, because we don't get along with everyone just because we're family. And not everybody gels together just because you're family. And just because you're biologically related to someone does not mean that you are going to be amazing kindred spirits. And so that brings us to the truth, which is open adoption takes that fantasy or that unknown out of your child's story. And she can know why you were chosen to be her parents, and that she has many people who love her and want the best for her. Kim, I know that you hear this from some families. How do you usually help families move past this fear that open adoption would be confusing?
For one thing, most of our adoptions, I would say about 95% of our adoptions, are planned at birth or during pregnancy, which is what that birth mom wanted for her child. She wanted you to be the only mom and dad her child has ever known. Mm-hmm. And, we can really only speak for adoptions done through our organization. So we work with domestic adoption, voluntary relinquishment, where this is what the birth mom chose. Mm-hmm. And the majority of birth moms are planning while they're pregnant or immediately after the birth. So, I mean, there's no other memory of any other mom and dad, so there's nothing, as long as you're open as the child grows up about the adoption at an age-appropriate level, there's never any opportunity for confusion to enter in, because your child doesn't know any other mom and dad. Like maybe you looking down at that child from your point of view, knowing there's a biological birth mom, and birth father out there, you might have that concern, but your child looking up at you is seeing the only mom and dad they've ever known, or mom they've ever known. So that usually helps clear things up very quickly, because I think that a lot of the confusion and myths come from other types of adoption, like foster adoption, or just any adoption where the child maybe was not voluntarily relinquished. Well, basically that's foster adoption. But I think with private adoption, with infant adoption, there's just not really an opportunity for any confusion. So you really don't need to be concerned about that. And there are so many resources available, like books, children's books, that can paint the picture of adoption in a positive way, because it is a very positive thing. Like the birth mom or the adoptee that shared, even though her experience in reuniting with the birth mom after a closed adoption, reuniting, I mean, even though she didn't have a relationship all along, she wasn't confused about it at all.
Right, and she said, I had a great life. I had opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. So she had her mom and dad, and you'll see in her story, too, she talked about how maybe if she'd had an open adoption, there might have been some things that were a little uncomfortable along the way, but that her parents would have been flexible about it because that was just their story. And that's why we brought up this slide here too, which is also another photo of adoptive mom, a child, and the birth mother. And here you can see he's actually, he's not a baby. And he's known about her for some time. And we had a good question come in here that actually I want to share first. We had another tip from Kim. Thank you, Kim. That,
Listener Kim.
A good book, yes, a good book to read is the 20 Things Adopted Kids Wish Their Adoptive Parents Knew by Sherry Eldridge, and I've heard so many eyes opened from this book. So it's good to read now, and that's why we have here, a good tip to address this myth with, if you have this fear that open adoption would confuse your child, start thinking now about how you're going to talk about adoption with your child before the adoption happens. And then we had a great question here, Kim. Thank you, Kelly. What is the appropriate age to tell a child about their adoption?
Any age, as soon as possible. Incorporate it into your heritage, just as anything else in your heritage or anything else that you instill in your child. You don't wait until the age of 7 to instill certain things about your faith or values into a child. You start at the very youngest of age when the opportunity first presents itself. And don't let your child have a false assumption about adoption or being a biological child when an adoption was really how they came to you. That way you won't have a hole to dig yourself out of later. And Libby, there was an interview we did where the adoptive mom, she shared that they incorporate prayer, they incorporate adoption in prayer on a regular basis. So that's an easy way. I mean, if you think about children, they can start to understand very complex concepts from a young age if it's presented in an age-appropriate way. And they don't need to know all the details and ins and outs. But the basic concept that they have a birth mom who chose this for them, and here's a picture of the birth mom, and she cares how you're doing, so we send her letters and photos a couple times a year. And if we ever have medical information questions for you, don't worry, because we know we can reach her and get those answers if anything was to come up.
Right.
So,
and we had a good comment here that said it's easier to talk to your child about questions they may have if you keep that open communication with the birth parent. And that's part of the tip that I popped up here on our slide is, one of the questions we have not only about when is it appropriate to tell my child, but also if I do have an open adoption, how does my child call their birth mother? How do they have a name for them? Do they call them Mommy Teresa? Whatever that might be. I'm looking at these pictures of these women. That's one of their names. And that's different That's different for every family, every adoption. And you'll hear, again, I would love to just point all of you back, when you're hearing these things talked about tonight, think about maybe later this week or this weekend that you go onto adoptionteleconference.com and listen to some of the stories that we've had recently, because these questions come up. What does your child call his birth mother? And it's different for everyone. So you can talk about that with your child's birth mom. And like Kim said, to just have that ongoing throughout the child's life and not make it this huge milestone day where you sit this child down and say, I don't know if you've noticed, but, you weren't born to us and we adopted you. This could be a huge shock compared to just raising the child because you're comfortable with your story and it's just part of how your family came together.
Yeah, and when people also, when they plan to wait until the child reaches a certain age to inform them that they were adopted, usually that age coincides with an already confusing time in a child's life, like adolescence, and that's the last thing you need to add on top is confusion and deception and feeling like you lied by omission.
Yeah.
So
well, and Kim, you brought up something earlier, too, where it does kind of lead to this confusion, which is, and we didn't really talk about this, but not only with fantasy, if a child doesn't know the birth history, or if there's just really a lack of information there about their birth mother or why the adoption happened, a fantasy can go either way. It can be this sing-song, Mary Jane, wonderful fantasy. My birth mother must have been this amazing woman who I would meet her and she would just bond with me instantly, and just sort of this fantasy of someday we'll
she's
reconnect.
A princess, she's a model,
right.
she's a CEO, there's
anything.
All these things. Yeah.
And then the other side could be this total negative thing of my birth mother must not have wanted me. My birth mother must not be on a right. She must have been uneducated or too young, or anything's possible. And Kim, you brought up such a good point because you are a mom and you see this just probably even in how you talk about yourself. Yeah. That you don't want your child's identity to come from fantasy. You want them to understand, here's the truth about how we became a family, and any reality that comes from your birth history doesn't necessarily mean that that's who you are. Kim, you explained it so much earlier, so much better.
Well, I was just saying, we don't, as parents, whether you're parenting as a couple or parenting after a divorce or whatever it is, you don't talk poorly about your child's parent to the child because they may kind of project that onto themselves, thinking, well, if that's how my father is, then I must be that way too. And it can be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's you just need to be open about it and be very clear that your child is who they are because your child is here because your birth mom chose adoption for you. And here was the difficult circumstance she was faced with, and she made the best decision she knew to make given the circumstances. And she always wanted you to know that she loved you, and that's why she chose this for you.
Actually, and we had a family here chime in that says that's why it is important to remind the child that adoption was chosen for them out of love. And there was another good comment here that came in. I love all this participation tonight. And I know for those of you, sometimes we try and keep these within an hour, but I don't want to look over some of these really great comments. So if you could just hang with us another 10 or 15, we're going to try and wrap up for you, but we want to make sure we cover all our bases tonight. So. But this comment here, it says, are there any situations where the adoptive parents have the birth mother or birth parents become like a child's godparents if they have a good relationship? And I would say probably there are instances. Now, I don't want to say that and freak those of you out who might be thinking, whoa, well, I'm not sure I'm going to be that close with her. But
I already know who my child's godparents are going to be.
Right, exactly. But that also reminded me of the fact that sometimes you may have the opportunity to know your child's birth grandparents. And in that case, that might even be an easier relationship because then that's just more grandparents, not to
Well, and
take
you
the,
only embrace it if it's a healthy thing. You know, this is all based
and if
on
it's
that you and
mutually
birth mom
agreed
had
on. Right.
exactly. So, you know, yeah.
Mutual.
You basically structure it and set healthy boundaries and have that relationship and decide according to what's healthy, just like you do with every other relationship in your life.
Yes. we keep getting such great feedback from Kim tonight. I'm going to ask her to be a webinar speaker for us.
Yeah, I think so. She said, my son loves hearing his adoptive story. He asked early. He was 4.5 when I adopted him through Lifetime. He is 8 years old now. So,
which we had someone comment earlier, thank you, Lindsay, where it said, what if the child's older? You know, is it possible a birth mother still wants an open adoption? Yes. Everything's possible. And I will share right now, sometimes even with those older child adoptions, whether they're 1 or 4 or 8, she may be choosing open adoption maybe because she's worried that the way her life is going, that child might be taken by the state, and then she won't have a say over who adopts her child, and she may not even get to know where that child goes or ever find out how that child is doing after the adoption. So sometimes they're choosing open adoption to prevent the chance that they might lose control over what happens to their child, if that makes sense. So yes, absolutely. One of the things we try and hammer home with adoption education to birth mother audiences is that it is never too late for adoption, because we want her to know, even if you research it when you're pregnant and you decide to try to parent that baby, she might get 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, and maybe things have completely changed, or maybe they never panned out the way she really planned on them going. And she may have in the back of her mind, you know, well, maybe I should revisit adoption, and it happens a lot. So that's a great point to bring up. Let's see here. So then I popped up the final part here, which is, you know, also to point out, like Kim said, you're going to talk about it as early as possible, but it's going to be age appropriate. As your child matures, he'll understand more about the people involved in his adoption. So they don't have to turn 2 and have everything defined to them. No, you're going to do it just like you would explaining anything in your life. I mean, I'm sure those of you on the call who have been parents for a while now, you went through those phases where your child figured out that you have a first name. Your name is not just mom, and maybe they even called you by your first name for a while. Like,
and that grandma is your mom.
Right. Right, like it's all clicking. Like, oh, what? Like, you have a mom? And so, again, these are people involved in their life that they're not, I would imagine probably those first few years of open adoption, most families tell me that, you know, the child is hanging around you. They don't really know this other person well. It's not like a person that's in their life all the time, like grandma or auntie or cousins or even a neighbor, that this might be a person that you're just maybe having the video chat with on Skype, or you get a letter from or an email from, or you send letters to, and maybe you talk about her, but he's not going to, it's not necessarily going to click that this is somebody I trust and want to hang around with, because essentially to him as a child, all he knows are the people in his world regularly. So don't be surprised. I remember when I first started working here, Kim, that I was working with a family who was on their second lifetime adoption, but they shared with me how they went to have a visit after it was probably about 4 years after the adoption with their son's birth mother, and that the birth mother was actually upset because he didn't want to hang around her. He wanted to play on the jungle gym at the park they met at. And so they had explained to her, well, he's a little boy. Like, even if he doesn't even want to sit on my lap and I'm his mom, like, you know, it's not personal. Yeah. The child is not rejecting you because he wants to go play on the swings. You know, he's a child and you're not a familiar person to him, so he's going to be polite, but there's not going to be this. this miraculous thing happening here. It's going to be
And there,
more between you as the adopted parents and the child's birth mother.
there's not really that opportunity for an influence from birth mom to the birth child. It's you are the influence. You are there day in, day out, 24/7. And that's what she wanted. So that's why she chose you and chose adoption, because you are what she wanted.
Right. And so the truth is, you know, every child has a right to know their birth history as age is appropriate. Even if your child doesn't want that connection later as an adult with his birth mom, he may still need or want access to his medical history, you know, or the reasons for the adoption. So, you know, take it day by day. I don't want all of you to feel like you've got to have all this figured out by the time your baby comes home, because every adoption is different. Every child is going to grow up to be an individual. One example that comes to mind is even Marty, the founder of Lifetime. She wishes her son wanted more of a relationship with his birth mother, but he has told her over and over, "Mom, you're my mom, and I don't need to know her better." So that's fine with him. He's in his 20s now. You don't need to shove it down his throat every single day. You know, let this become a decision for him as well. But by you keeping it open, it allows your child to see that you're not threatened by this, but that you embrace his history and his questions.
Well, and I think for Corey, Marty's son, that he has always known about adoption. It's a normal thing to him. All his life growing up in the 80s and 90s, you know, he always saw and heard about people being adopted. He had babies in his home that were ready to be adopted. You know, it's natural for him. So if you can kind of do that, maybe not to that extent, but just have it be a normal thing. It's not a scary thing anymore.
Yes, and yeah, good comment here. It says, don't force anything on the child. Just move at their pace. Again, it's the same thing with you. You know, you're going to move through this at your own pace, and you'll know what your child can handle. And also, I want to reinforce again, anything with open adoption is on healthy terms. Now, that is not to say, because you've got to figure that these women choosing adoption, if they were in completely stable moments in their lives, probably wouldn't be turning to adoption. So there may be things about their life that you don't necessarily understand or agree with, but as long as she's not a dangerous threat to your family, you shouldn't wait necessarily until she's completely stable and making all the healthy choices possible in her life to share a picture with her.
Right.
You know, now you may hold, if she has a habit of getting in and out of jail because she dodges traffic tickets all the time, or maybe she runs in circles with people who get in and out of jail, maybe you want to share with her, we would love to have a visit with you someday, but the choices you've been making lately were a little, you know, we're more concerned about our safety and our child's safety. We'd love to visit with you under these terms, you know, that you had a loving outline for what that would look like so that she could decide, well, yes, I can meet those terms, or no, I can't.
And we've heard so often from birth moms that the adopted family is their inspiration for doing better. That when they check in, she wants them to be proud of her so that her child can be proud of who their birth parent is.
That's so true. And I also want to encourage all of you, if you're on the call and you're currently waiting to adopt and you already have your profile going out to birth moms, or, you know, if you're thinking about, well, gosh, how will that be to have my profile just going out to birth moms? I am always just so inspired that all of you put yourselves out there to be role models for these women, and you're not even trying to be. But so many women may decide to parent. Maybe you never even hear of her name. You never even knew she read your profile. But you may have inspired her to become the mom that she wanted to be for her baby. And that's only going to come back to bless you. So that's just a little bit of a side note that you can stew on. But you are reflecting positive choices to birth mothers, and sometimes they choose that directly for their baby, and other times you may indirectly influence her to be a better parent. So just have faith that who you are is going to get you to the baby that you're called to adopt. So let's move on to myth number 3 here, because we've had a lot of comments coming in, I think, that circle around this, so I'm glad that we waited till the end, although I hope you all can hang out with us. But let's bring this up on the screen here. Myth number 3, Kim, open adoption means I'm not really or completely mom or dad.
This is a big one, and it even stems down to our language that we use. Even when we say, "Well, we couldn't have our own children of our own," or that my child will someday want to find their real mom. It's like, well, who do you think you are? You're the real mom, and this child is going to be a child of your own. And I mean, you'll learn when they're 2 or 3. There's no peeling them off you, your mom and your dad. So.
Right, and I think a good way to hammer this in is to understand the reasons, and Kim touched on this a little bit ago, the reasons why your child's birth mom will choose you is because she wants you. She wants you to be the parent. She's not looking to co-parent with you. And this is a good tie-in to a comment we had at the beginning of our call that we made them wait, so I hope they're still here. Albert, thank you for your comment. Does the birth mom try to parent from a distance, possibly undermining any authority we have as parents? No. No, she usually does not want to do that. She doesn't want to co-parent. And it's not, Kim brought up divorce. Some of you on the call, maybe you're on, maybe you have a blended family already and you're looking to adopt a child together, to raise a child together, but you're currently maybe raising children from previous relationships, or maybe you grew up through a blended family or a divorced home, and you remember that joint custody. Open adoption is not joint custody. It is not co-parenting. It's not like even if you decide you're comfortable with having a visit with your child's birth mom in the future, it's with you. It would be like, Kim and I are friends, but she might let me take her daughter to the park or a ball game or something like that.
I would.
But, I mean, we're coworkers, so I would expect if I was going to hang out, it would be she and her daughter and me, not just she drops her daughter off. It's not a babysitting thing. It's not a joint custody thing. It's we get together for lunch, but more often than not, what open adoption really means is just that you remain open to her, and that you're sharing updates, you're sharing milestones, you're sharing photos of your whole family, not just the baby, that you're showing her this family you helped to create, or she helped to create in you, and how happy you all are together. If any of you joined us a couple weeks ago when we had Holly on our webinar, she is a birth mother who chose adoption 4 years ago. I loved when we had up this beautiful photo of the adoptive parents that she chose for her son, and he was probably about 3 in the picture, and he just had this big smile. And I asked her, are there ever moments when you think about your life now and think, I could have made it work because now my life is stable and I wish I had him? And she said, no, I look at that smile and how happy they are with him, and I know he is their child. And that just gave me chills, because I thought that's so perfect. That's such an important reason why sharing photos with her is important, because you're showing her, that you're so glad that she chose you. And look how happy and well you're all doing together. So again, and she's not looking to co-parent.
I was really glad that we had the opportunity to have Holly on the webinar, because she worded things so well and shared in such clear, concise ways what we so often hear from birth moms. That she was able to speak out about it. And that's definitely an interview you should listen to if you haven't already. She also mentioned that she didn't want to cause any instability or interfere. And I think that's where birth moms come from. I'd like to have an open adoption, but I don't want to interfere because I want my child to have stability with this set of parents that I'm choosing.
Mm-hmm. So, just to sum that up too, again, she's choosing you to be her child's full-time parents.
Yeah.
And
Libby, haven't you ever had a birth mom ask you, well, if I choose adoption, are they going to expect me to share custody, like have her every other weekend and that type of thing?
Right.
I've had birth moms say that.
Sometimes I have, which leads us to our next one. She wants you to be legally responsible for her child. And this is a big one here, because here's a scenario that could happen. If she decides, say the birth father says, well, I'll take care of the baby, and maybe she doesn't choose adoption. He's raising the child, but maybe her rights are still intact. Then something happens to the kid, maybe they're in preschool or something, just imagine anything. She's legally responsible to this child, even though she's not the full-time caregiver. Even though he's raising this child. This could happen if her mother said, I'll step in, I'll raise a baby for you. But usually legal adoptions aren't happening within kinship or interfamily adoptions. So she still has this legal obligation, this legal responsibility to the child. And that's a risk. If she's thinking, well, I don't even live in town. Like, my mother's raising my son, and she let him go off and do this, and now the state's calling me because I'm legally his parent. She wants you. She wants to sever her legal ties so that you are the ones responsible for making choices for this child. So.
And with adoption, that is the fact of it, is that you are the only parents legally responsible for that child. She's no longer tied to that child in any way. Like, on paper, the law only sees you as parents.
Exactly. And, this leads back to the profile comment we made earlier. You present the life that she wants her child to have. So she's choosing you because she saw everything you have to offer, and she wants her baby to have that. So give her baby that. You're the mom and dad. Give her baby what she wanted her baby to have. And then here's a big one too, that it comes down to the fact that birth moms really want to be reassured that you're going to raise and accept her child as the complete mom and dad, that you're going to love and accept this child just as you would a biological child. So it's a complete myth to say that open adoption means you're not mom or dad, because one of the reasons she's choosing adoption is because she wants to make sure you completely are confident that you are mom and dad. And I've even heard a lot of birth moms say, oh, I would love for them to get some sonogram photos from my prenatal visits, or maybe even come to an appointment with me when they, go to see how long the baby is at this stage, or whatever appointment it might be. Because birth moms will even say, even before she knows you, well, it will be their baby. I want them there to, through the pregnancy. So she already sees that.
Birth mom is free to do what she needs to do to better her life, knowing her child will be safe with you. That is like the perfect essence of what birth moms are really driving at when they're asking all these questions about adoption and the family that they're picking. And thank you so much, Kim, for being with us as a previous lifetime family, taking the time to join us tonight.
So, and I want to thank all of you who are chiming in with your comments, saying this is really helpful information, because we are hoping it would. We know that this might tap a nerve, and we just want for all of you to feel a little bit like a sigh of relief, maybe, to just say, okay, other people have thought this before. It is not a weird feeling to have this, but there is a truth behind it that I need to collect and own. We want you, like Kim said earlier, I love that word, confidence. I want you guys to have confidence before you choose open adoption, or before you even choose to talk with your child's birth mom for the first time, that that you've addressed these fears and these myths, because when you talk to her, she's going to assume that you have addressed these and that you've overcome them. So don't give her any reason to doubt your commitment to being her child's parents. Move through the education
And actually, I need to give credit because Gail, who was with us as a listener, she's one of our families. She was actually the one who, a while ago when I was talking with her, she shared that it was that confidence, and she put that name to everything I was trying to share with families, confidence. Confidence that I am the mom, and open adoption doesn't take anything away from that. And once she had that confidence, she felt comfortable having an open adoption.
Excellent. And I want to thank, too, we had some questions earlier come in that started out, on the very hesitant side, and we just got a couple comments from those same people saying, I'm feeling more comfortable about this now. So, I didn't expect for this hour to be some miracle turnover, but I'm just hoping that it opened some of your eyes, or just softened you a little bit to just feel like, okay, this doesn't have to be completely foreign. This is going to be our story, and it's going to look the way it pans out for you personally. And again, I just want to reassure you, the truth is, a child you adopt becomes your own child, emotionally and legally. You are, quote unquote, the real parents. And I put that in quotes because, like Kim said earlier, one of the things that you have to watch when you're talking about adoption in general is just your language. How are you referring to the child you want to adopt? How are you referring to yourselves? And look at, okay, well, if I'm calling the biological parents the real parents, well, then where do I fit in? So then that might be feeding your fear of not being mom or dad. So, just look at the words that are coming out and find out, well, do I need more information, or is that accurate? Or is there a reason that I have this fear? And again, contact us too. If there's something that you need more information about, and that's what leads us over here too. I want just quickly to put up these points to get past the common fears of open adoption. Education, again, educate yourself about your choices as an adoptive parent. If open adoption is not the right option for you, maybe you want to look into international or foster care, or maybe you want to pursue fertility treatments further. But get the information first before you decide what's right for your family. Kim brought up a great point earlier, so I wanted to include it here. Learn about adoption from a birth mom's point of view, and you can go to freeadoptionbook.com and download a copy of the book that every single woman considering adoption receives from Lifetime. It's called So I Was Thinking About Adoption. Again, that's freeadoptionbook.com, or you can order a copy on Amazon. And then...
Well, I just wanted to touch on that for a second. I think that it helps the most for you to feel more comfortable matching with a birth mom and pursuing open adoption when you can understand what her motives and reasons are, and what she's the point of view she's coming from. That's why I think the birth mom interviews that we offer on adoptionteleconference.com are so important and so helpful, is because once you can learn what her thoughts were and what her reasons were, then it's not so scary anymore.
That's such a good point, and to know, because that's a conversation I'm having with her. When I talk with women considering adoption, I'm talking about what all of you are going to go through, or what you have gone through with the home study process too. That I'm explaining the things, the motions and the steps you're taking to get to the point where she's going to be able to choose you. And that's a good point to have on the other side. Understand the education and the steps that she's taking to get over to you as well. And we had some comments come in, that they did appreciate that book. It helped them understand a little bit more.
Well, and you're not going to be on your own with this ever, because we're always here. We have an open door policy at Lifetime. So even in real life practical application, if you have a question on how to set or reset a healthy boundary, or you're not hearing back from birth mom when you send letters and photos, contact us here at Lifetime. We're happy to help you because, we want to make it easy for you to fulfill your commitments you've made.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also receive those letters and photos and keep them in case we hear back from the birth mom again in the future. So we can play a helpful role if you want us to.
Absolutely. So I want to draw attention here to the final tip. Get experience from people touched by adoption. And we keep talking about the adoption stories. We're going to keep offering them too. The recordings, we have recordings available on lifetimeadoption.com. We have recordings available on adoptionteleconference.com. Also, there's a lot of feedback just going on daily through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/open.adoption. That's Lifetime Adoption Center's Facebook page. And it just helps. It helps to see the stories, the successes of others. It helps to even sometimes you get the opportunity or the privilege to see a comment from a child raised through adoption or a birth mother, and to just see this ongoing topics addressed by people who are living with adoption, and that will help you see more of the possibilities and the potentials, and that it turns from something that you can't quite see yet to, oh, well, yeah, I could see myself in a situation like that, and then moving step by step.
Speaking of birth moms commenting on Facebook, there is a birth mom organization that comments and is friends with us and likes our page and everything on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to their website, and they had a link to a vlog of an adoptive mom talking about her relationship with the birth mom that chose her. And if you guys want a link to that, just email me, kim@lifetimeadoption.com, and I'll send you the link. And it's on YouTube, but I'll send you the direct link so you don't have to hunt it down on your own.
Great. We had a question or a comment coming here that just said, the more webinars I listen to, the easier it is for me to be okay with open adoption, but it's still a scary thought when you don't know your child's birth mom yet, and that's the point. I don't want you guys to be scared. But when you know the one, all of the puzzle pieces just kind of click together. Because now it's not 20 different possibilities and characters and personalities. Now it's the one woman, because it only takes one birth mom to make your adoption happen. You don't need 15 or 25 or 55 birth moms interviewing you. Most families only talk with one birth mom and then they adopt. So just keep remembering, just like with a friendship or even a job interview, it's going to be the right fit, and you'll move through it step by step. It doesn't all have to come together in 30 minutes. And Lifetime, again, we are there to walk you through every single step and to help you foster that relationship and grow it and get the answers to questions you may not feel comfortable asking right away, and just making sure that you are taking the most positive avenue toward a smooth adoption process and a smooth and positive adoption relationship after the adoption happens. So, Kim, I'm going to put up a slide here so that if anyone has any questions after tonight, they know how to reach us. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, too, as we talked about the common myths and fears that adopting parents have about open adoption, and that we encourage you, if there's anything that struck a chord tonight or that you feel like, well, I still have these fears or I still have these concerns, share that with us. We talk a lot, Kim, about just how much we want to hear from all of you, and we've heard it all, so please don't worry about coming across as weird or offensive or anything. If you have a concern or a thought on your mind, we want to help you address it and get the answers you need so that you can make the right decision for your family. So you can contact us. You can email us at adopt@lifetimeadoption.com. You can call our office Monday through Friday. Kim and our other coordinators are available to answer your questions if you are still just considering Lifetime or thinking about adoption. But if you're already working with Lifetime and you have any concerns or you need more information about open adoption, let your coordinator know. She'll be happy to point you in the right direction or get you the answers you need. So you can visit lifetimeadoption.com. You can call us Monday through Friday at 530-432-7373. And if you haven't yet submitted an application, we want to learn more about you and your adoption hopes and needs. So you can fill that out free online at lifetimeadoption.com/apply. Kim, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up tonight?
No, I just want to thank you guys all for sticking with us. We know this was an extra long webinar, but it was a long time coming. I'm really glad that we sat down and had this talk and we're able to get a lot of these things out into the open. And there are other topics that stem from this that also need to be, discussed and learned about. So we have more webinars planned to, address those other things, like how to talk to your child about adoption, and we've already done webinars on with our Q&A where we addressed how to share about adoption with friends and family, what to share, what not to share. Marty's an ace at giving advice on things like that. So we know there are other topics wrapped up linked to this, and we welcome your advice or your ideas, input for other webinars you want to hear about. Just email us. You can email Kim at lifetimeadoption.com. But, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to be with us tonight. And I think we really wanted to do this webinar, and I'm glad that we were able to do it and have such a great interactive audience.
Absolutely. And I look forward to meeting with all of you again soon. If any of you have questions on here, I think we addressed them all tonight, but I'm going to do a quick scan before we wrap up tonight and make sure that I get you all an answer if we didn't tap on it already tonight. But I look forward to meeting with you again soon. And our next webinar will be an open question and answer on, I think, the 23rd. And you can find information about that at adoptionteleconference.com. So,
or keep an eye on your email.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.
Bye, everyone. Have a great night.